Is it going yet? Yeah, there we go. All right, guys. So I stopped in the middle of a chapter. I'm so sorry. I try not to do that. But I went a little over last time. I read 19 and part of 20. So in chapter 19, we finally found out what release means. And I think it's safe to say that Jonas had a nervous breakdown. He realized that it's not just this sweet little, sending them off to another, faraway land. It's essentially murder. And he was really upset that his dad was doing this. So it's kind of, I guess, release, if I were to explain it in like simpler terms, it's kind of like putting your dog to sleep. But in this case, they're putting humans to sleep. So there's some definite ethical dilemmas here. So the giver and Jonas decided in chapter 20, the small bit that I read, that this isn't right and that they have the power to change society if they choose. And so they're about to hatch a plan. And this is where it's getting pretty good here. I will say, in terms of the narrative arc of this story, we probably reached the climax in chapter 19 with Jonas understanding what release means, because now he's faced with a decision. Is he going to just live with that and be in silence and continue on with society? Or is he going to, make some social changes that he sees fit? So let's continue on with chapter 20 today. By the way, there's only 24 chapters in this book, so we're almost done here. The giver invited him over for like a sleepover of sorts, by the way. It was late at night now. They had talked and talked. Jonas sat wrapped in a robe belonging to the giver. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I forgot to do the poem. I'll do that later. Okay. It was late at night now. They had talked and talked. Jonas sat wrapped in a robe belonging to the giver. The long robe that only elders wore. It was possible what they had planned, barely possible. If it failed, he would very likely be killed. But what did it matter? If he stayed, his life was no longer worth living. Yes, he told the giver, I'll do it. I think I can do it. I'll try anyway, but I want you to come with me. Oh, okay, we should probably backtrack and, remind ourselves what we were, what their plan was before we stopped for the weekend. They had mentioned something about a river and how if they went beyond the river or something or past the river, the memories would then be sent into the community and the community would have to deal with them and heal. And the giver said, okay, well, I can stay behind and help everyone through this traumatic process and you continue on, I think. Let's keep going. The giver shook his head. Jonas, he said, the community has depended all these generations back and back and back on a resident receiver to hold their memories for them. I've turned over many of them to you in the past year, and I can't take them back. There's no way for me to get them back if I have given them. So if you escape once you're gone, and Jonas, you know that you can never return. Jonas nodded solemnly. It was the terrifying part. Yes, he said, I know, but what if you come with me? The giver shook his head and made a gesture to silence him. He continued, if you get away, if you get beyond, if you get to elsewhere, it will mean that the community has to bear the burden themselves, of the memories you have been holding for them. I think that they can and that they will acquire some wisdom, but it will be desperately hard for them. When we lost Rosemary 10 years ago and her memories returned to the people, they panicked. And those were such few memories compared to yours. When your memories return, they'll need help. Remember how I helped you in the beginning when the receiving of memories was new to you? Jonas nodded. It was scary at first, and it hurt a lot. You needed me then, and now they will. It's no use. They'll find someone to take my place. They'll choose a new receiver. There's no one ready for training, not right away. Oh, they'll speed up the selection, of course, but I can't think of another child who has the right qualities. There's a little female with pale eyes, but she's only a 6. That's correct. I know the one you mean. Her name is Catherine, but she's too young, so they will be forced to bear those memories. I want you to come, giver, Jonas pleaded. No, I have to stay here, the giver said firmly. I want to, Jonas. If I go with you and together we take away all their protection from the memories, Jonas, the community will be left with no one to help them. They'll be thrown into chaos. They'll destroy themselves. I can't go. Giver, Jonas suggested, you and I don't need to care about the rest of them. The giver looked at him with a questioning smile. Jonas hung his head. Of course they needed to care. It was the meaning of everything. And in any case, Jonas, the giver sighed, I wouldn't make it. I'm very weakened now. Do you know that I can no longer see colors? Jonas's heart broke. He reached for the giver's hand. You have the colors, the giver told him, and you have the courage. I will help you have the strength. I will help you to have the strength. A year ago, Jonas reminded him, when I had just become a 12 and when I began to see the first color, you told me that the beginning had been different for you, but that I wouldn't understand. The giver brightened. That's true, and do you now, Jonas? That with all the knowledge now, with all your memories, with all you've learned, still you won't understand? Because I've been a little selfish. I haven't given any of it to you. I wanted to keep it for myself to the last. Keep what? When I was just a boy younger than you, it began to come to me, but it wasn't the seeing beyond for me. It was different. For me, it was hearing beyond. Jonas frowned, trying to figure that out. What did you hear? He asked. Music, the giver said, smiling. I began to hear something truly remarkable, and it is called music. I'll give you some before I go. Jonas shook his head empathetically. No, giver, he said. I want you to keep that, to have with you when I'm gone. Jonas went home the next morning, cheerfully greeted by his parents, and lied easily about what a busy, pleasant night he had had. His father smiled and lied easily, too, about his busy and pleasant day the day before. Throughout the school day, as he did his lessons, Jonas went over the plan in his head. It seemed startlingly simple. Jonas and the giver had gone over it and over it late into the night hours. For the next 2 weeks, as the time for the December ceremony approached, the giver would transfer every memory of courage and strength that he could to Jonas. He would need those to help him find the elsewhere that they were both sure existed. They knew it would be a very difficult journey. Oh my gosh, I just put this together. They don't even know elsewhere exists. And they're the ones with all the wisdom. Woo! Risky. Okay. Then, in the middle of the night before the ceremony, Jonas would secretly leave his dwelling. This was probably the most dangerous part, because it was a violation of a major rule for any citizen not on official business to leave a dwelling at night. I'll leave at midnight, Jonas said. The food collectors will be finished picking up the evening meal remains by then, and the path maintenance crews don't start their work that early, so there won't be anyone to see me, unless, of course, someone is out on emergency business. I don't know what you should do if you are seen, Jonas, the giver had said. I have memories, of course, all kinds of escapes. People fleeing from terrible things throughout history, but every situation is individual. There is no memory of one like this. I'll be careful, Jonas said. No one will see me. As receiver in training, you're held in very high regard already, so I think you won't be questioned very forcefully. I'll just say I was on some important errand for the receiver. I'd say it was all your fault that I was out after hours. They both laughed, a little nervously, but Jonas was certain that he could slip away unseen from his house. Carrying an extra set of clothing, silently he would take his bicycle to the riverbank and leave it there hidden in the bushes with the clothing folded beside it. Then he would make his way through the darkness on foot silently to the annex. There's no nighttime attendant, the giver explained. I'll leave the door unlocked. You simply slip into the room. I'll be waiting for you. His parents would discover when they awoke that he was gone. They would also find a cheerful note from Jonas on his bed, telling them that he was going for an early morning ride along the river, that he would be back for the ceremony. His parents would be irritated, but not alarmed. They would think him inconsiderate, and they would plan to chastise him later. They would wait with mounting anger for him. Finally, they would be forced to go, taking Lily to the ceremony without him. They wouldn't say anything to anyone, though, Jonas said, quite certain. They wouldn't call attention to my rudeness because it would reflect on their parenting. And anyway, everyone is so involved in the ceremony that they probably won't notice that I'm not there. Now that I'm a 12 and in training, I don't have to sit with my age group anymore. So Ash will think I'm with my parents or with you. And your parents will assume you're with Asher or with me. Jonas shrugged. It will take everyone a while to realize that I'm not there at all. And you and I will be long on our way by then. In the early morning, the giver would order a vehicle and driver from the speaker. He visited the other communities frequently, meeting with their elders. His responsibilities extended over all the surrounding areas, so this would not be an unusual undertaking. Ordinarily, the giver did not attend the December ceremony. Last year, he had been present because of the occasion of Jonas's selection, in which he was so involved, but his life was usually quite separate from that of the community. No one would comment on his absence or on the fact that he had been chosen this day to be away. When the driver and vehicle arrived, the giver would send the driver on some brief errand. During his absence, the giver would help Jonas hide in the storage area of the vehicle. He would have with him a bundle of food which the giver would save from his own meals during the next 2 weeks. The ceremony would begin with all the community there, and by then Jonas and the giver would be on their way. By midday, Jonas's absence would become apparent and would be a cause for serious concern. The ceremony would not be disrupted. Such a disruption would be unthinkable, but searchers would be sent out into the community. By the time his bicycle and clothing were found, the giver would be returning. Jonas by then would be on his own, making his journey elsewhere. The giver on his return would find the community in a state of confusion and panic, confronted by a situation which they have never faced before, and having no memories from which to find either solace or wisdom. They would not know what to do and would seek his advice. He would go to the auditorium where the people would be gathered still. He would stride to the stage and command their attention. He would make the solemn announcement that Jonas had been lost in the river. He would immediately begin the ceremony of loss. "Jonas, Jonas," they would say loudly, as they had once said the name of Caleb. The giver would lead the chant. Together they would let Jonas's presence in their lives fade away as they said his name in unison, more slowly, softer and softer, until he was disappearing from them, until he was no more than an occasional murmur, and then, by the end of the long day, gone forever, not to be mentioned again. Their attention would turn to the overwhelming task of bearing the memories themselves. The giver would help them. "Yes, I understand that they'll need you," Jonas had said at the end of the lengthy discussion and planning, "but I'll need you too. Please come with me." He knew the answer even as he made the final plea. "My work will be finished," the giver had replied gently, "when I have helped the community to change and become whole. I'm grateful to you, Jonas, because without you, I would have never figured out a way to bring about change. But your role now is to escape, and my role is to stay." "But don't you want to be with me, giver?" Jonas asked sadly. The giver hugged him. "I love you, Jonas," he said, "but I have another place to go. When my work here is finished, I want to be with my daughter." Jonas had been staring glumly at the floor. Now he looked up, startled. "I didn't know you had a daughter, giver. You told me that you'd had a spouse, but I never knew about your daughter." The giver smiled and nodded. For the first time in their long months together, Jonas saw him look truly happy. "Her name was Rosemary," the giver said. "Oh, it all makes sense now. All right, time check. Ooh, doing so well. All right, chapter 21. It would work. They could make it work. Jonas told himself again and again throughout the day. But that evening, everything changed. All of it. All the things they had thought through so meticulously fell apart. That night, Jonas was forced to flee. He left the dwelling shortly after the sky became dark and the community still. It was terribly dangerous because some of the work crews were still about, but he moved stealthily and silently, staying in the shadows, making his way past the darkened dwellings and the empty central plaza toward the river. Beyond the plaza, he could see the House of the Old with the annex behind it, outlined against the night sky, but he could not stop there. There was no time. Every minute counted now, and every minute must take him farther from the community. Now he was on the bridge, hunched over on the bicycle, pedaling steadily. He could see the dark, churning water far below. He felt surprisingly no fear, nor any regret at leaving the community behind, but he felt a very deep sadness that he had left his closest friend behind. He knew that in the danger of his escape, he must be absolutely silent. But with his heart and mind, he called back and hoped that with his capacity for hearing beyond, the giver would know that Jonas had said goodbye. It had happened at the evening meal. I think this is a flashback in case you're like, what is she talking about? There's a little page break. The family unit was eating together as always. Lily chattering away, mother and father making their customary comments and lies, Jonas knew, about the day. Nearby, Gabriel played happily on the floor, babbling his baby talk, looking with glee now and then toward Jonas, obviously delighted to have him back after the unexpected night away from the dwelling. Father glanced down toward the toddler. "Enjoy it, little guy," he said. "This is your last night as a visitor." "What do you mean?" Jonas asked him. Father sighed with disappointment. "Well, you know he wasn't here when you got home this morning because We had him stay overnight at the nurturing center. It seemed like a good opportunity with you gone to give it a try. He'd been sleeping so soundly. Gee, I wonder why. Didn't it go well? Mother asked sympathetically. Father gave a rueful laugh. That's an understatement. It was a disaster. He cried all night, apparently. The night crew couldn't handle it. They were really frazzled by the time I got to work. Gabe, you naughty thing, Lily said with a scolding little cluck toward the grinning toddler on the floor. So, Father went on, we obviously had to make the decision. Even I voted for Gabriel's release when we had the meeting this afternoon. Jonas put down his fork and stared at his father. Release? He asked. Father nodded. We certainly gave it our best try, didn't we? Yes, we did, Mother agreed empathetically. Lily nodded in agreement too. Jonas worked at keeping his voice absolutely calm. When? He asked. When will he be released? First thing tomorrow morning. We have to start our preparations for the naming ceremony, so we thought we'd get this taken care of right away. It's bye-bye to you, Gabe, in the morning, Father had said in his sweet sing-song voice. Jonas reached the opposite side of the river, stopped briefly, and looked back. The community where his entire life had been lived lay behind him now, sleeping. At dawn, the orderly, disciplined life he had always known would continue again without him. The life where nothing was ever unexpected or inconvenient. Or inconvenient or unusual. The life without color, pain, or past. He pushed firmly again at the pedal with his foot and continued riding along the road. It was not safe to spend time looking back. He thought of the rules he had broken so far, enough that if he were caught now, he would be condemned. First, he had left the dwelling at night, a major transgression. Second, he had robbed the community of food, a very serious crime, even though what he had taken was leftovers, set out on the dwelling doorstep for collection, so garbage scraps. Ew. Third, he had stolen his father's bicycle. He had hesitated for a moment, standing beside the bike port in the darkness, not wanting anything of his father's and uncertain as well whether he could comfortably ride the larger bike when he was so accustomed to his own. But it was necessary because it had the child seat attached to the back. He had taken Gabriel too. Oh, my favorite part. Okay, this is a long one. Oh, so long. Okay, there's like 4 more pages left. He could feel the little head nudge his back, bouncing gently against him as he rode. Gabriel was sleeping soundly, strapped into the seat. Before he had left the dwelling, he laid his hands firmly on Gabe's back and transmitted to him the most soothing memory he could. A slow, swinging hammock under palm trees on an island someplace at evening, with the rhythmic sound of languid water lapping hypnotically against a beach nearby. Holy imagery, guys. Oh my God, that was beautiful. As the memory seeped from him into the new child, he could feel Gabe's sleep ease and deepen. There had been no stir at all when Jonas lifted him from the crib and placed him gently into the molded seat. He knew that he had the remaining hours of night before they would be aware of his escape, so he rode hard, steadily, willing himself not to tire as the minutes and miles passed. There had been no time to receive the memories he and the giver had counted on of strength and courage, so he relied on what he had and hoped it would be enough. He circled the outlying communities, their dwellings dark. Gradually, the distances between communities widened, with longer stretches of empty road. His legs ached at first, then as time passed, they became numb. At dawn, Gabriel began to stir. They were in an isolated place. Fields on either side of the road were dotted with thickets of trees here and there. He saw a stream and made his way to it across a rutted, bumpy meadow. Gabriel, wide awake now, giggled as the bicycle jolted him up and down. Jonas unstrapped Gabe, lifted him from the bike, and watched him investigate the grass and twigs with delight. Carefully, he hid the bicycle in thick bushes. Morning meal, Gabe! He unwrapped some of the food and fed them both. Then he filled the cup he had brought with water from the stream and held it for Gabe to drink. He drank thirstily himself and sat by the stream watching the new child play. He was exhausted. He knew he must sleep, resting his own muscles and preparing himself for more hours on the bicycle. It would not be safe to travel in daylight. They would be looking for him soon. He found a place deeply hidden in the trees, took the new child there, and lay down, holding Gabriel in his arms. Gabe struggled cheerfully as if it were a wrestling game, the kind they just played back in the dwelling with tickles and laughter. Sorry, Gabe, Jonas told him. I know it's morning, and I know you just woke up, but we have to sleep now. He cuddled the small body close to him and rubbed the little back. He murmured to Gabriel soothingly, then he pressed his hands firmly and transmitted a memory of deep, contented exhaustion. Gabriel's head nodded and after a moment fell against Jonas's chest. Together, the fugitives slept through the first dangerous day. Little page break. The most terrifying thing was the planes. By now, days had passed. Jonas no longer knew how many. Gosh, feels vaguely familiar. The journey had become automatic. The sleep by day, hidden in underbrush and trees, the finding of water, the careful division of scraps of food, augmented by what he could find in the fields, and the endless, endless miles on the bicycle by night. His leg muscles were taut now. They ached when he settled himself to sleep, but they were stronger, and he stopped now less often to rest. Sometimes he paused and lifted Gabriel down for a brief bit of exercise, running down the road or through a field together in the dark, but always, when he returned, strapped the uncomplaining toddler into the seat again and remounted. His legs were ready. So he had enough strength of his own and had not needed what the giver might have provided had there been time. But when the planes came, he wished that he could have received the courage. He knew they were search planes. They flew so low that they woke him with the noise of their engines, and sometimes, looking out and up fearfully from the hiding places, he could almost see the faces of the searchers. He knew that they could not see color, and that their flesh, as well as Gabriel's light golden curls, would be no more than smears of gray against the colorless foliage. But he remembered from his science and technology classes at school that the search planes use heat-seeking devices that could identify body warmth and would home in on two humans huddled in shrubbery. So always, when he heard the aircraft sound, he reached to Gabriel and transmitted memories of snow, keeping some for himself. Together they became cold, and when the planes were gone, they would shiver, holding each other until sleep came again. Sometimes urging the memories into Gabriel, Jonas felt that they were more shallow, a little weaker than they had been. It was what he had hoped and what he and the giver had planned. That as he moved away from the community, he would shed the memories and leave them behind for the people. But now when he needed them, when the planes came, he tried hard to cling to what he still had of cold and to use it for their survival. Usually the aircraft came by day when they were hiding, but he was alert at night too on the road, always listening intently for the sound of the engines. Even Gabriel listened and would call out, "Plane! Plane!" sometimes before Jonas had heard the terrifying noise. When the aircraft searchers came, as they did occasionally during the night as they rode, Jonas sped to the nearest tree or bush, dropped to the ground, and made himself and Gabriel cold. But it was sometimes a frighteningly close call. As he pedaled through the nights, through isolated landscape now, with the communities far behind and no sign of human habitation around him or ahead, he was constantly vigilant, looking for the next nearest hiding place should the sound of engines come. But the frequency of the planes diminished. They came less often and flew when they did. When they did come, less slowly, as if the search had become haphazard and no longer hopeful. Finally, there was an entire day and night when they did not come at all. For those of you wondering, when is this going to end? It just did. All right, so we'll hit up chapter 22 tomorrow, and looks like we're on track to finish this book very soon. Okay, what time are we at? 1:28. Perfect. I'm going to stop recording, but I am going to share the poem for the day with y'all. Boop, boop.